These days we are doing the doubt sessions through Google Meet as well as Streamlabs. So as per the doubts of few people, I have selected one chapter that we already have discussed few weeks back, and in order to clear the doubts, I have again decided to start up with this chapter once more so that you people can understand this chapter, as it is one of the important chapters in English literature. The name of the chapter is An Angel in Disguise. So I would like to suggest you people to be ready with your notebooks and pen so that you can jot down the important points related to this chapter along with the keywords. Okay, I can see the link has been shared. Quickly click on the link and join the class. As I have already told, good evening Shubhi, good evening Janvi, good evening Aditi. Okay, so as you people know that I have already told that we discussed few doubts. Okay, so we have already discussed uh, this chapter, An Angel in Disguise. So just to make you people more clear about this chapter, just to make you people more understand this chapter, I have decided to start up with this chapter once again. So I would like you to be ready with the notebook and pen. After this chapter, I'll be sending one worksheet, okay, through Wisdom group based on this chapter only. So you need to practice it. Okay, now let's understand this chapter. The chapter is An Angel in Disguise by T.S. Arthur. An Angel in Disguise, in 1851 it was published, was featured in Arthur's collection uh, After a Shadow and the Other Stories. The sweetness of that sick child looking ever to her in love, patience and gratitude was as honey to her soul, and she carried her in her heart as well as in her arms, a precious burden. So this is only a gist of the story. Now the story starts from here. Idleness, vice, and intemperance had done their miserable work, and the dead mother lay cold and still amid her wretched children. Now, this is a story of a child who is handicapped, or you can say a specially abled child. But the irony of her life is that her mother died. Her mother died, and she lay. The beginning of the scene, the beginning of the chapter is quite negative, first of all. In the introduction of the chapter, the writer has highlighted one very negative point, that is, the mother of the children lay cold and still amid her wretched children. She had fallen upon the threshold of her own door in a drunken fit and died in the presence of her frightened little ones. So that there were three children, and the mother had a habit of drinking. Because of that alcoholic problem, ultimately she died, and she left three little children, the frightened little ones, behind. And out of those three children, one was a girl who was, as I told you, physically handicapped. Good evening, Charu. Death touches the spring of our common humanity. This woman had been despised, scoffed at, and angrily denounced by nearly every man, woman, and the child in the village. Now, the woman who died, she did not have a good, you know, character. She was not liked by the villagers as she has a habit of drinking throughout the day. Okay, she was not financially well. She would do odd jobs, and whenever used to get money, she would spend that money on purchasing liquor, and that is the bad habit of her. She was totally a neglected mother who never ever bothered about her children, and because of that, one day she had to face the death and she died, leaving her three children behind. And that is the irony of the story. Okay, now what was the things? What are the things related to that lady? She was, scoffed and she was angrily denounced by nearly every man, woman, and child in the village. Nobody liked that lady in the village. But now, as the fact of her death was passed from lip to lip, the news already got spread in the entire village regarding her death. In subdued tones, pity took the place of anger and sorrow of denunciation. Now, as soon as the news got spread in the entire village about the death of that lady, alcoholic lady, now the angry villagers became little bit emotional, not because of her death, but because of the small and innocent children that she left behind. Neighbors went hastily to the old tumble down hut. So she used to live along with the three children in a very shabby or dull kind of a hut, you can say, in which she had secured little more than a place of shelter from summer heats and winter colds, some with grave clothes for a decent interment of the body, and some, good evening Pratham, and some with food for the half starving children. So she used to live in a very small hut, and it was not a very comfortable hut as they were, very, very poor, and their living conditions were totally pathetic. But somehow she managed the shelter to protect herself and the little children with the summer heats, from summer heats and the winter cold. Okay, she had barely very few clothes for herself and the children, and she used to spend the days like this. But she had a bad habit, as I told you, that whenever she used to get money by begging or by doing odd jobs, she would spend that amount on purchasing alcohol and neglecting the half starving children. The children would not get enough to eat. Three in number. So there are three children. Of these, John, the oldest one, a boy of 12, and a stout lad. Stout means a short heighted lad. Lad means boy. He is able to earn his living with any farmer. Okay, so he's fit as according to his age, and is fit enough to earn his own living if he is associated with any farmer. So he has an idea of working in the field. So it is not a big deal for the John to survive his, to earn his livelihood, to survive his in this condition. Now the second, Kate. She was between 10 and 11 years of age. She was very bright. She was an active girl out of whom something clever might be made if in good hands. Now she has a caliber. Okay. Now the narrator has presented her as a very bright and active girl. Okay. But the thing is that if she has to be given to a good hands, then only she will prosper. So it is not also a big deal for Kate to earn his livelihood. Now the biggest thing, biggest negativity appeared in the life of the youngest child, whose name is Maggie. But poor little Maggie, the youngest, was hopelessly diseased. She was, physically handicapped. So the main problem arrived. what to do with her. 2 years before, a fall from a window had injured her spine, and she had not been able to leave her bed since, except when lifted in the arms of her own mother. So 2 years before, 2 years back, an incident took place that she fell out from the window and her spinal cord got injured, and since then till now, she's on the bed. What is to be done with the children? The villagers started asking the question. That was the chief question now. The dead mother would go underground, would be buried, and be forever beyond all care or concern of the villagers. But the children must not be left to starve. So it was a major concern that was being discussed among the villagers. After considering the matter and taking it over with his wife, Farmer Jones said that he would take John. Okay, Farmer Jones volunteered into the conversation and he decided that he would take the oldest son, who was 12 years of old age, whose name was John. He said, John said that he would like to, adopt John and do well by him now that his mother was out of the way. And Mrs. Ellis, who had been looking out for a bound girl, concluded that it would be charitable in her to make choice of Katy. Now, the second decision was made by Mrs. Ellis, and she decided that she is going to take Katy, who was a very bright and active girl, even though she was too young to be of much use for several years. But what to do with Maggie? I could do much better, I know, said Mrs. Ellis, but as no one seems inclined to take her, I must act from some sense of duty. Expect to have trouble with the child, for she's an undisciplined thing, used to having her own way. Now she needs to be trained. Okay, Katy needs to be trained. That is why Mrs. Ellis said that I would like to take her and I would like to, develop her in a very sophisticated lady. I would educate her, train her, and would make her fit and fine in several years to come so that she can stand on her feet and earn her livelihood. So that was a very great decision by Mrs. Ellis. But no one said I'll take Maggie because nobody wanted to have a headache of taking that paralyzed child. Pitying glances were cast on her wan and wasted form, and thoughts were troubled on her account. Mothers brought mothers brought cast-off garments, and removing her soiled and ragged clothes, dressed her in clean attire. The sad eyes and patient face of the little one touched many hearts. Okay, though the villagers were very emotional seeing that little girl lying on the bed, but nobody dared to make a decision that who is going to take Maggie, who is going to adopt Maggie, and even knocked at them for entrance, but none opened to take her in. Who wanted a bedridden child? Okay, that would be a big headache. Take her to the poor house. Poor house means the where the you know orphaned child orphaned children are kept. That is known as poor house. Now somebody suggested, a rough man, okay, a random person of the village suggested that take her to the poor house. Said a rough man, of whom the question, what's to be done with the Maggie, was asked. Nobody is going to be bothered with her. The poor house is a sad place for sick and helpless child, answered one. What is the poor house? Poor house is a place where the homeless and the helpless and the sick child is to be given. For your child or mine, said the other, lightly speaking, but for this brat it will prove a blessed change. She will be kept clean, have healthy food, and be doctored, which is more than can be said of her past condition. So somebody also suggested in the village that yes, poor house is good enough. She can be kept clean over there, she can have healthy food, she can be doctored also. Okay, which is more than can be said for her past condition. There was reason in that, but still it didn't satisfy. The day following the day of death was made the day of burial. Burial is the ceremony, the last ceremony where the deceased, a dead body, is dug and kept into the grave and dug deep into the ground. A few neighbors were at the miserable hovel, but none followed dead carts, as it bore to unhonored remains at its pauper grave. So during the burial ceremony, very few villagers went to the graveyard because most of the villagers did not like that lady, that alcoholic lady. Okay, and it was the last ceremony of that deceased lady, so very few villagers went to the graveyard to perform the death ceremony. Farmer Jones, after the coffin was taken out, placed John in his wagon and drove away. So after the burial, what happened? Jones took John in his wagon and he went away, satisfied that he had done his part. Mrs. Ellis spoke to Kate with a hurried air, bid your sister goodbye, and drew the tearful children apart ere scarcely their lips and touched in sobbing farewell. Now, soon after that, Mrs. Ellis took Kate, okay, in a very hurried manner, and she said that bid the last goodbye to your paralytic sister. The children were weeping, but there was no other option left with them, so the children had to follow. Hastily others went out, some glancing at Maggie and some resolutely refraining from a look until all had gone. Now, slowly and gradually, what happened? The crowd disappeared in front of the hut of that lady, and only one scene could be visible, that was a paralytic, innocent small girl was all alone lying on the bed in that hut. Hastily others went out, some glancing at Maggie and some resolutely refraining from a look until all had gone. She was all alone at that time. Just beyond the threshold, Joe Thompson, the character, another major character in this story, he appeared in the scene. The wheelwright paused and said to the blacksmith's wife, who was hastening off the rest. He was very emotional, though everybody was emotional, but nobody dared, as I explained you, that nobody dared, nobody had a confidence to take that paralytic child. Okay, because nobody wanted to have that kind of a headache. But Joe Thompson felt really, you know, he felt he was totally emotional by seeing when nobody was there in front of the house. He said that it's a very cruel thing to leave her all alone like this. Then take her to poor house, she will have to go there, answered the blacksmith's wife. The blacksmith's wife said that if you are so much concerned about that little girl, why don't you take her to the poor house? Blacksmith's wife said, springing away and leaving Joe behind. For a little while the man stood with a puzzled air. He was confused what to do. Then after that he turned back and went into the hovel again. Hovel is a small hut. Maggie with painful effort had raised herself to an upright position and was sitting on the bed, straining her eyes upon the door out of which all had just departed. A vague terror had come into her thin white face, and Maggie was very depressed. She did not expect that she would be witnessing this kind of scene ever in her life. So she was very pathetic. The sadness could be visible, could be seen through her eyes, and she was just staring at the door. Now after that, what happened? Oh, Mr. Thompson, she cried out, catching her suspended breath. Don't leave me here alone, please, she requested. Though rough in exterior, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, had a heart. A soft-hearted person he was, and it was very tender in some places. He liked children and was pleased to have them come to his shop, where sleds and wagons were made or mended for the village lads without a draft on their hoarded sixpences. Now Joe Thompson was a very kind-hearted person. Okay, he loved the children so much, and उससे वो सीन देखा नहीं गया. No, dear, he answered in a kind voice, going to the bed and stooping down over the child. You shall not be left here alone. Then he wrapped her with the gentleness almost of a woman in the clean bedclothes which some neighbor had brought, and lifting her in a strong arms, bore her out into the air and across the field that lay between the hovel and his home. Now he made that bold decision, and ultimately what happened? He picked that little innocent girl in his arms, okay, covered with a sheet, and he decided to take her home. Now, Joe Thompson's wife, who happened to be childless. Now, there is one more thing in the life of Joe Thompson and his wife, that they did not have any child. Okay, only the husband and wife used to live in the small house. Now, Joe Thompson's wife, who happened to be childless, was not a woman of saintly temper, nor much given to self denial for others' good, and Joe had well grounded doubts touching the manner of greeting he should receive on his arrival. Now, Joe Thompson's wife was not a very kind hearted lady. Okay, she did not like to help others very often, but Joe Thompson's on contrary part, he was very kind hearted man. So ultimately what happened, Joe Thompson's brought that paralyzed child home. After that what happened? Wait a minute. Yes. Mrs. Thompson saw him approaching from the window and with ruffling feathers met him a few paces from the door. As he opened the garden gate and came in, he bore a precious burden and he left it to be so. As his arms held the sick child to his breast, a sphere of tenderness went out from her and penetrated his feelings. A bond had already corded itself around them both, and the love was springing into life. Now, when Mrs. Thompson saw that her husband was carrying that little girl in his arms, she became a little bit frustrated and irritated. Okay, and she started thinking that why my husband has decided to bring this paralytic child at home. Okay, this was a very foolish decision of my husband. But till then, a great bonding of love and gratitude was already glued between Joe Thompson and that little girl. What have you there? Sharply questioned Mrs. Thompson. Joe felt the child start and shrink against him. Sir, can we say that she is a bit depressed and frustrated as because she didn't have any child? Yes, correct. She was depressed and frustrated also because she was childless. Could be one reason. And another reason, that is the most highlighted reason in this chapter, is that nobody wanted, nobody wanted to take the responsibility of the paralyzed child. Okay, that's why the villagers did not bother about the child. So both could be the reason. If you mention these two reasons in your answers, if the question comes on the basis of this context, you can mention both the reasons. Both the reasons are absolutely correct. Joe felt the child start and shrink against him. He did not reply, except by a look that was pleading and cautionary that said, "Wait a moment for explanations and be gentle." And passing in, carried Margie to the small chamber on the first floor and laid her on the bed. Now at that point of time, Joe Thompson did not give answer, or he did not have any kind of explanation to give to his wife. But ignoring her, what he did, he took that little child into the bedroom and laid her on a bed. Then stepping back, he shut the door and stood face to face with a vinegar-tempered, vinegar means bitter-tempered, wife in the passageway outside. "You haven't brought home that sick brat." Brat is a slang language. Okay, that is used to consider anyone. Now the wife, who was very angry, she said, "You should not have brought home that sick brat." Anger and astonishment were in the tones of Mrs. Joe Thompson. Her face was in a flame. "I think women's hearts are sometimes very hard," said Joe. Usually Joe Thompson got out of his wife's way or kept rigidly silent and non-combative when she fired up on any subject. It was with the same some surprise therefore that she knew encountered a firmly set countenance and a resolute pair of eyes. Now it was a habit of Joe Thompson whenever his wife used to rebuke or to scold or to show anger, what Joe Thompson did, he kept quiet. So at that point of time also he said only one line, that is, I think women's hearts are sometimes very hard. And after that he kept silent, because if he would have spoken something, that argument would have converted into a verbal fight. Women's hearts Women's hearts are not half so hard as men's. Joe saw by a quick intuition that his resolute bearing and had impressed his wife, and he answered quickly and with a real indignation. Be that as it may, every woman at the funeral turned her eyes steadily from the sick child's face, and when the cart went off with her dead mother, hurried away and left her alone in that old hut with the sun not an hour in the sky. It was the evening time, and very politely and gently Joe Thompson said, explained to his wife. What he explained, he said that, didn't you see that all the villagers in the evening time after the sunset went away, leaving that sick child all alone in the house? Nobody bothered even. So I was bothered. Okay, I felt terrible seeing the situation of that little girl. So that is the reason I have brought her home. Where were John and Kate? Asked Mrs. Thompson. Farmer Jones tossed John into his wagon and drove off. Katy went home with Mrs. Ellis, but nobody wanted the poor sick one. Send her to the poor house was the cry. Like everybody was giving the same foolish suggestion that to send that little girl to the poor house. Then why didn't you let her go then? What did you bring her here for? She can't walk to the poor house, said Joe. Somebody's arm must carry her, and mine are strong enough for the task. That was a very gentle and the bold reply that he had given to his wife. Then why didn't you keep on? Why did you stop here? Demanded the wife. You should have taken her to the poor house. Because I am not apt to go on fool's errands. The guardians must first be seen and a permit obtained. उसने कहा मैं ऐसे ही किसी को I am a stranger. I am just like a stranger to that little girl. I cannot, give that girl to the poor house. I must find her guardians. Okay, and to obtain a permit, then only it is allowed to give over the responsibility of any child to the poor house. There was no gainsaying this. When will you see the guardians? Was asked the imperishable impatient. Tomorrow. He bluntly replied tomorrow. उसने कहा कल मैं जाके इसके guardians को का पता लगाऊंगा. Guardians means relatives. Why put it off till tomorrow? Go at once for the permit and get the whole thing off your hands tonight. And he said, Jane, said the wheelwright, with an impressiveness of tone that greatly subdued his wife. I read in the Bible sometimes and find much said about little children, how the Savior means Jesus Christ, rebuked the disciples who would not receive them, how he took them up in his arms and blessed them, and how he said that whosoever gave them even a cup of cold water should not go unrewarded. Now it is a small thing for us to keep this poor motherless little one for a single night, to be kind to her for a single night, to make her life comfortable at least for a single night. So he quoted a verse from the Bible. Okay, Joe Thompson quoted a verse from the Bible, that in the Bible, when Jesus Christ had shown kindness, politeness towards his disciples, means the followers, why can't we? We are human beings. At least we can give a comfortable night to this little child. The voice of the strong rough man shook, and he turned his head away so that the moisture in his eyes might not be seen. Mrs. Thompson did not answer. Now, by saying this, Joe Thompson became so emotional that the tears appeared in his eyes, and Mrs. Thompson understood the feelings of her husband. So after that, Mrs. Thompson did not answer, but a soft feeling crept into her heart. Look at her kindly, Jane. Speak to her kindly, said Joe. Think of a dead mother and the loneliness, the pain the sorrow that must be all her coming life. The softness of his heart gave unwonted eloquence to his lips. Mrs. Thompson did not reply, but presently turned towards the little chamber where her husband had deposited Maggie, and pushing open the door, went quietly in. Joe did not follow. He saw that her had changed, and felt that it would be best to leave her alone with the child. So he went to his shop, stood near the house, and worked until dusky evening, realized from his labor. So what happened? He did not say any word, okay, and he went for his job till the dusky evening, released from his labor. Labor means mehnat. A light shining through the little chamber windows was the first object that attracted Joe's attention on turning towards the house. It was a good omen. ओमेन मतलब डेस्टिनी, एक सिक्स सेंस होता है, एक इंट्यूशन होता है कि ये अच्छी चीज़ होने वाली है. While he was returning from his work, as he saw a bright light in one of his rooms, and he had an intuition that it was a good omen, कि कुछ अच्छा हो रहा है मेरे घर में. The path led him by the windows, and when opposite, he could not help pausing to look in. It was not dark enough outside to screen him from the observation. And what he observed out of his surprise, what he observed, that Maggie lay a little raised on the pillow with a lamp shining full upon her face. Mrs. Thompson was sitting by the bed, talking to the child, but her back was towards the window so that her countenance was not seen, means her face, the front body was not seen. From Maggie's face, therefore, Joe must read the character of his intercourse. He saw that her eyes were intently fixed upon his wife, that now and then a few words came, as if in answer from her lips, that her expression was sad and tender. But he saw nothing of bitterness or pain. Okay, now what he observed by just seeing the face of that little child, Joe observed that the little child had a sadness and a little bit of tenderness, a softness on his face, because maybe it must be she was remembering her dead mother, but he could not see what he could not see the bitterness or any kind of pain on the face of that little child. That was a positive impact. A deep drawn breath was followed by one of relief as a weight lifted in itself from his heart. On entering, Joe did not go immediately to the little chamber. His heavy tread about the kitchen brought his wife somewhat hurriedly from the room where she had been with Maggie. Now his wife, Joe Thompson's wife, was with Maggie at that time, and she was serving her food. Joe thought it best not to refer to the child, nor to manifest any concern in regard to her. How soon will supper be ready? He asked. Right soon, answered Mrs. Thompson, beginning to bustle about. There was no asperity in her voice. After washing from his hands and face the dust and the soil of work, Joe left the kitchen and went to the little bedroom. A pair of large bright eyes looked up at him with a snowy bed, looked at him tenderly, gratefully, and pleading. How his heart swelled in his bosom. With what a quicker motion came the heartbeats. Joe sat down and now for the first time examining the thin frame carefully under the lamp light, saw that it was an attractive face and full of childish sweetness, which suffering had not been able to obliterate. Now he looked at the face of the innocent child, and what he observed, that the child was little bit comfortable. She was totally relaxed, as if she has gained a new life. Your name is Maggie, he said, as he sat down and took her soft little hands in his. Yes, sir. Her voice struck a chord that quivered in low strain of music. Have you been sick long? Yes, sir. What a sweet patience was her in her tone. Has the doctor been to see you? He used to come, but not lately. No, sir. Have you any pain? Sometimes, but not now. When had you pain? This morning my side ached and my back hurt when you carried me. It hurts you to be lifted or moved about. Yes, sir. Your side doesn't ache now? No, sir. Does it ache a great deal? Yes, sir, but it hasn't ached any since I have been on a soft bed. The soft bed feels good. Okay, she was so happy that for the first time in her life, she was lying on that very soft and comfortable bed. Oh, yes, sir, so good. What a satisfaction mingled in gratitude was in her voice. Supper is ready, said Mrs. Thompson, looking into the room a little while afterwards. Joe glanced from his wife's face to that of Maggie. She understood him and answered, she can wait until we are done. Then I will bring her something to eat. There was an effort at indifference on the part of Mrs. Thompson, but her husband had seen her through the window and understood that the coldness was assumed. Joe waited after sitting down to the table for his wife to introduce the subject uppermost in both of their thoughts, but she kept silent on that theme. Now the Joe Thompson was expecting the same question was being asked by his wife regarding the poorhouse, but at that time, out of surprise, Joe Thompson's wife did not ask the same question, but she was silent for many minutes, and he maintained a like reserve. At last, she said abruptly, what are you going to do with the child? I thought you understood me that she was going to the poorhouse, replied Joe, as if surprised at her question. Mrs. Thompson looked rather strangely at her husband for a sonic moment, and then dropped her eyes. The subject was not again referred during the meal. At its close, Mrs. Thompson toasted a slice of bread and softened it with the milk and butter. Adding to this cup of tea, she took them into Maggie's room and held the small waiter on which she had placed them, while the hungry child ate with every sign of pleasure. Is it good? Asked Mrs. Thompson, seeing with what a keen relish the food was taken. The child paused with the cup in her hand and answered with a look of gratitude that awoke to new life old human. Sonic movement means a moment of transformation. Okay, sonic movement means a moment of transformation, like from negativity to positivity. As a child's life was full of negativity, now it has turned into positivity. There was a spark, there was energy, there was a compassion, gratitude, and love which the little child never experienced. Now she started experiencing. So that is a life changing moment, a sonic moment. The child paused with the cup in her hand and answered with a look of gratitude that awoke to new life old human feelings which had been slumbering in her heart for half a score of years. We'll keep her a day or two longer. She is so weak and helpless, said Mrs. Joe Thompson in answer to her husband's remark at breakfast time on the next morning that he must step down and see the guardians of the poor about Maggie. She'll be so much in your way, said Joe. I shan't mind that for a day or two. Poor thing. Now, slowly and gradually, what we have witnessed, there was a great bonding between Joe Thompson's wife and that poor girl. What light and blessing did the sick and helpless child bring to the home of Joe Thompson, the poor wheelwright? It had been dark and cold and miserable there for a long time just because his wife had nothing to love and care for out of herself, and so became so irritable and ill-tempered and self-afflicting in the desolation of a woman's nature. The same point that Charu has highlighted, that she was depressed and frustrated because she didn't have any child. So one could see, one could witness and experience the irritable, ill-tempered and self-afflicting mood of that lady, okay, of her woman's nature. Now the sweetness of that sick child looking even ever to her in love, patience and gratitude was as honey to her soul, and she carried her in her hearts as well as in her arms, a precious burden. As for Joe Thompson, there was not a man in all the neighborhood who drank daily of more precious wine of life than he. So the little girl proved to be an angel in disguise for the husband and wife because they did not have any child. An angel had come into this house, disguised as a sick, helpless, and miserable child, and filled all its dreary chambers with the sunshine of love. So it is known as a sonic movement, a transformation for both of them. The girl got a new life, and the parents, the husband and wife, who were childless, got an angel in disguise. I hope now you people have understood the story. After this class, I'll be sending you the worksheet based on this chapter in the PDF form. You need to practice it, and if you find any difficulty, yes, they have got angel as a child. So I'll be forwarding you the worksheet. Practice it, and if you find any problem in any of the questions, you can ask. Till then, thank you so much. Take care, all of you. God bless you. Goodbye.